Yeah. And this is a panel about African solutions for Africa, not necessarily African solutions for African problems, because I think that in a way starts off with sort of a negative connotation. But all of you in your own way found something hit a button with all of you, and you came up with your very personal solution to very different problems. But I'm going to start with you, just because you're over there, Sarah. And give me a sense of your story, and particularly why Liberia and why clean water.
Sure. For me, I left Liberia in 1989, right before the Civil War broke out. I returned 20 years later, and what I saw completely shocked and devastated me. It just wasn't the Liberia I remember growing up as a young child. 250,000 lives were lost during the war. The country's infrastructure was completely ruined. Clinics, education facilities, sewage systems, just everything completely destroyed. And the country was just in abject, people lived in abject poverty. And one of the areas that struck me the most was the issue of water and sanitation, where over half of the country's population lacked access to clean water, and over 2 million people out of a country of 3.5 million lacked access to proper sanitation. So I mean, it was a no-brainer. I made it my issue. I made it my problem to get involved and give back and work with the government and the international community to fix the water crisis in Liberia.
Okay, we're going to get some more details, but I just want these personal stories because in a way that they've motivated you to do something. Tell me your story as well.
I was born and raised, obviously, in South Africa and had been living in New York for quite a few years. And on one of my visits back, I was going around the schools in Soweto with an old school teacher who was a friend of mine. And at one of the schools, the children had literally separated themselves from the other kids at break time because, unlike the other kids who could afford to bring a little tiny something to eat at break, they had nothing, and they didn't want to have to watch the kids who had food eating. And in that moment, I realized the gravity of the situation, and it just shifted the entire direction of my life. And we created the Lunchbox Fund to provide a daily meal to impoverished children, and often their only guaranteed meal of the day at school, which, for us is incredibly important as it fosters education, and it gives children an incentive to come to school because they're going to find something to eat, and when they're there, they're going to be able to concentrate. Not falling asleep at the desk or being truant because they have to find a way to survive outside. And obviously, education is paramount in change, especially in our country, all over the world.
Thank you. And for you, Ndidi, I mean, for you, it's a number of issues, but it's about agriculture, it's about import, it's about local.
So basically, I think what drove us to start Ace Foods was the realization that in Nigeria, 60% of our population is engaged in agriculture, and yet 40 to 60% of our vegetables and fruits go to waste. We have one of the highest malnutrition rates in the world, which was shocking to me. 40% of our young children are stunted, and 21% are wasted. And similar to the education bit, the first 1,000 years of a child's life, their brain is formed, and if they're malnourished, they can't function. They can't function in the educational system, and that follows them through. So my passion was basically realizing and finding out these statistics because I was doing some consulting work in the area about 5 years ago, but also realizing that, the average Nigerian is not even aware of the fundamental challenges through the agricultural landscape. And personally, I feel it because when I travel abroad as a mom, I'm always trying to buy food, because it's cheaper. The average household in Nigeria spends 50% of their household income on food. And that is
because
terrible.
It's imported.
Because it's imported. 90% of it is imported, of the processed food we eat. And this is an issue around the whole of West Africa. So the idea was, can we source from farmers locally, process for the local market so that we can displace imports? And if we displace imports, we create jobs all through the value chain and empower lives, help more people get out of poverty. So we created a social enterprise called Ace Foods, and we started with very basic processing because of the high cost of doing business. So we started with spices. So we sourced spices from local farmers in northern Nigeria, and we supply to the fast food companies and Saks, the consumer goods companies, the noodle companies, and then we also have a retail product that we sell in about 50 grocery stores. And it's been a slow start, but we're making a difference in the lives of the employees, but more importantly, in the lives of the farmers.
What struck me when I was speaking to all of these ladies beforehand, and we were sort of trying to get a sense of everyone's stories, was how many of them, and many people I interview over the years on Marketplace Africa on CNN, is this sort of bridge that the diaspora creates between understanding very local problems, coming up with a solution that's quite a small act in a way, but using the United States to raise funds or to get some sort of critical mass behind your initiative. How important is that? I mean, particularly for you, you were saying in a way, could you have done this if you'd never left Liberia?
Absolutely not. I think the skill sets and knowledge that we gain when we live and travel abroad is critical to the success of an organization like mine. I do a lot of the fundraising and development work in the U.S., in Boston and in New York, and the funds that we raise go back to Liberia to implement the projects. There's a lot of in-country funding from USAID and other non-governmental agencies in the country, but they go to the larger NGOs and international organizations that, quite frankly, in my opinion, are not doing a good job of solving Liberia's problems, which is why I think it's important that we, as Liberians, whether it's local or from the diaspora, should go back and contribute to the country's advancement.
I think the role of people, literally this globalized society, how important has it been for you using the United States, again, to raise money? In a way, you say you want to grow your organization, but you couldn't have done it by starting, say, in South Africa first. You had to go international and then come back and be local. There's a sort of weird sense of a circle that's being squared.
I mean, I think for me, a large part of it was perception. I definitely grew up in a sort of a bubble, so my perception of where I was from changed having been outside of that. And, I was able to galvanize a lot of funds, attention, support, people there that, in my experience, allowed me to get traction in South Africa in a way that I don't know if I could have started the same way here off the ground.
Because I think what I'm coming to in this sort of discussion is that we're all championing, local or, African solutions to African problems, but sometimes things have to be on CNN or you have to go to Boston to get the money before these things are actually kick-started. I mean, are Africans themselves, or all of us, sometimes a bit shy to look literally at something that's staring us in the face and to invest in it and to put marketing and, actually take a risk on local things, do you think?
Well, I think in Nigeria we've received a lot of support on the ground. So I haven't had the similar experience with going abroad to get support. I think because we have a huge country, a huge economy, we're very conscious of the challenges in the country. I've received a lot of support locally. But what I've noticed, though, is the mindsets of the average Nigerian. We talked about it with the branding piece. When it comes to food, that imported food is better than local food. When you actually dig deeper, you realize that the longer food spends on the sea, on the shelf, the less nutritious it is, the more preservative it needs. It's so counterintuitive. And so we're fighting hard to change mindsets of the fast-moving consumer goods companies or the local population that, pepper in Nigeria is fantastic. Nobody can top our pepper. Why would you import pepper? It doesn't make any sense. So that mindset shift is critical. And then there has to be an enabling environment for all these ideas to reach scale, which we talked about. Yeah. There has to be the right environment and a policy framework that supports these ideas. Because we've proven that these models work. Now the challenge is, how can we take them to scale?
Because I think that is the key thing. These are small, in a way, projects. Do they need to be bigger? Or are you doing what you want to do by keeping it small? Or how do you make something local global, but at the same time keeping it local?
I mean, I think they absolutely need to get bigger. There's no question. I mean, in South Africa, there's 12 million children living below the poverty line. 8 million of those kids are fed by the government. Daily, that leaves 4 million kids who need a daily meal at school. So there's no question that it needs to get bigger, and there's no question that it needs to shift completely and come from within. And
so how does it get bigger? How, does the South African government, you don't have any relationship essentially in what you're doing with the government, is it literally about policy?
I think that it's a share of I think that it's a mixture of policy and small companies coming together and finding a way to work together.
And from your
I think policy plays a role, and government needs to step in and support local grassroots indigenous organizations that are run by locals, supported by locals, so that because they have a stake in their countries, in their communities. A lot of these international NGOs that come into Liberia, since the war ended, since President Sirleaf was elected, $2.4 billion of aid has been poured into the country. Yet over half of the population live below the poverty line. That's unacceptable. So I think the government needs to play a role in making sure that those funds are directed to the right local organizations that can actually bring about real change, because that's not happening now.
So is this then a failure of leadership?
Absolutely.
On a great scale? I mean, do you feel that individual women have to constantly find solutions to what, in a way, perhaps is the responsibility of local education department or the water department? I mean, do governments in Africa need more help, or do you think that they're really not doing what they should be doing? And how does that change?
Well, with the LEAP example, for example, LEAP experience, for example, I've noticed that in the West, at least in the United States, where I'm very familiar, when the government identifies an innovative project that is yielding results, they end up adopting it and scaling it up so that it becomes part of the system. LEAP has been working for the last 10 years, educating young people about leadership, helping them become change agents. We work in 26 states. And for the last 8 years, we've been trying to get the Ministry of Education to adopt our curriculum. It works. Just teach teachers this curriculum. And every other year, we find the government setting up another committee to develop curriculum for ethics or develop curriculum for leadership.
To them, here it is.
And so I always tell the government that, you know what, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. So just, the examples we've shared, I'm sure the HAL lunchbox system is more efficient, cost-effective than the 8 million that the government is feeding. But if they just adopted her program and scaled it up, they would save tons of money.
Absolutely.
So I think this issue and time, this competition element, where there's the private, public, and non-profit sectors. We're not in competition. We need to work together.
Yeah.
We can all bite up pieces of the puzzle and solve them collaboratively. But that mindset shift has not occurred.
And we're trying to do that with my organization as well. There are 128 organizations in Liberia, a country of 3.5 million, that claim water and sanitation as their focus area. 128. And they've been in the country since 2005.
And there's still not enough clean water.
Oh, no. I mean, you go 5-10 miles outside of Monrovia, and people are still drinking from creek water, from muddy creek water. We've been operating in Liberia for 2 years. We took a region, a state of about 60,000 people. We did our studies. We have the numbers. In 3 to 5 years, we can provide 100% clean water coverage to that entire state if we focus on that area with the right strategies, the right investment, the right funding. We can do it with a budget of $1.5 million. You have clean water organizations that are sitting on $30 million a year budgets, and yet people are still drinking from dirty creeks. It's unacceptable.
And I mean, I think as one of you said, it was a no-brainer, and all of these projects are no-brainers. And the question is, I mean, it perplexes me, and I'm sure it does you. I mean, the question is, why is it like this, that you're finding that you can't become bigger and more, have more of an impact? And we talk about failure of leadership of the government, but what about the sort of global aid industry? I mean, is that still, in a way, perpetuating the cycle of dependency,
Absolutely.
which is what you're talking about? But it's still not, in a way, broken down these old relationships that are quite hierarchical, and everybody gets something out of it. If you're in government, perhaps it's fueling that. So how do you break that? I mean, we can talk about the dead aid syndrome. It's all very fancy, but actually it's still there.
I mean, I think you break that by empowering young people who are starting organizations and enterprises like our own, and over time, these new models develop and sort of rupture the old bureaucracies, and I think it's a matter of time and energizing young people, and particularly women.
And I suppose, I suppose economic realities also play a part. I mean, many of these Western governments can't afford to sink in how many $1 million, 30 million, have a budget of $30 million for Liberia. So perhaps that is in itself a business opportunity. I mean, what is your sense in terms of Nigeria, how it manages these very small problems? Do you think the leadership is going to support 10 years' time? Do you think that your curriculum will be there? Or do you think you're going to be talking about it as well?
I have to be optimistic about the future. But I think, for me, private sector solutions, through Ace Foods, for example, when I compare it to LEAP, I feel like private sector organizations can serve more as a catalyst, because what we're doing is, by the fact that I've gotten into food with my husband, everybody's like, is there something in agribusiness? And we've spurred a whole range of companies entering the sector. And if we can create an army of change agents, from a private sector approach, which is like you're showing, you don't need the government. You're going to prove that you can do this successfully in spite of the challenges on the ground. Then you can create a ripple effect. Because I think there's a place for the government, but I'm not going to wait for the right president to show up.
Exactly.
I think that is
And that's what we're trying to do as well. Once we can prove that our model works in Riverside County and we can provide 100% water coverage, then hopefully we can use that and show it to the government and the international community and say, why haven't you done this? I mean, clearly, if you focus, you can provide clean water to the entire country of Liberia and beyond.
Any questions from the audience? Should we just go? There you are. Do you want to go first?
If you need a mic, let me know. Okay. You can stand up. Okay.
No, really, mine was just a comment. Somebody had mentioned something to do with aid, whether aid works. But I think this is what we've been talking about in Africa. The truth of the matter is, for every dollar that comes to Africa as aid, 70% goes to the country where it comes from. And the 30% goes to overheads. And it goes to a lot of other things. What actually gets to the people is about 5% of that aid. So when you talk about 2-point-something billion that came in, you can actually do the math to say what actually got to the ground. So for me, what actually works is like where I come from. I come from Zimbabwe. And some of the inroads that we are actually now making are actually coming from the private sector and Zimbabwean solutions for Zimbabwe other than aid. Aid is not going to work. Okay.
No, I agree with you.
I think everyone's on the same page as that, but I think there is an industry of aid, and there's the old one-size-fits-all model, and that's in a way what these ladies are trying to break is to have these little very individual grassroots models that potentially can change a lot of people's lives. Any other questions?
Not giving money and finding that only 40% of it, because the rest of it is going into operational expenses. But what are you doing about trying to get money from the private sector? I know that Liberia is a relatively sort of poor country in terms of the outcome of the war. But what are you doing about that?
Actually, most of the funds that we do raise comes from individuals and the private sector. We don't rely on the government or the sort of quote-unquote international aid industry to fund our projects. We go out individually, raise money through fundraising events. We reach out to corporations and small foundations that give us grant every year. Our operations are quite small right now. I myself don't take a salary. I left my job in corporate America 2 years ago to focus on this full time because I believe in it. And I've seen the effect the lack of clean water has on the lives of people. Just like you mentioned. I mean, people, children, men, and women and adults die from this stuff. So it's a big problem. You can't focus on developing a country if the basic necessity of water is not met. It's just a no-brainer. So this issue of water and sanitation and hygiene is critical to rebuilding and developing Liberia's economy. And so I've made this sort of my cause. I've made it a personal issue, and it has nothing to do with government or the aid agency. I go out on my own and fight to raise money so that that young child can live to see his or her 5th birthday by having access to clean drinking water.
Okay. I think we should close it on that note, unless there's one more thing you want to say, Robin. Well, I take my hat off for you. I mean, we just pulled you into this panel the last minute, but unbelievably so. You've done a fantastic job. Now I see why you're a pro. And I'd like to thank Saran, is that how you pronounce it? Saran. Topaz, my baby, and Ndidi. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.